Hello, BookTube. Is that a whiff of garbage in the air that I detect? Earlier today, Michael K. Vaughan made a video about what is garbage when it comes to books. What is garbage? Do we know it when we see it? Can we agree on it? Does it have universal characteristics? He made this video in the kitchen of rustic Vaughan Lodge. True story, and many of you may not know that Vaughan Lodge is a hunting lodge. And you might be wondering, well, we already saw a video of deer frolicking unmolested on his front porch at rustic Vaughan Lodge. So what could he possibly hunt? He hunts the greatest game of all. The servants at stately Vaughan Manor who displease him in any given week are hunted for sport at Vaughan Lodge on the weekends. No wonder he seems so tired by Mondays. But I wanted to make a response video to his video about what is garbage when it comes to books. What is it? Can we identify it? Does it have certain characteristics? And in this, as in all things, I thought one of the best ways to get at some of the ultimate defining characteristics of garbage would be to ask questions of the books that you are reading. So I have a list here on the yoga pad here of questions that we can ask to try to figure out what constitutes garbage. Question number one is the book incomplete on its own terms? Is it contained within itself? If it's not contained within itself, there's a strong argument to be made that it's not even a book. But is it contained within itself? For instance, pastiche novels. Most of them are so lazy that they are not contained within themselves. If you don't know the thing being pastiched, you won't have any idea what's going on in the pastiche novel. Same thing is true with an example that Michael brings up in his video, which is novelizations of other kinds of entertainment. The novelization of a movie, the novelization of a TV show, the novelization of a video game. Novelizations, by their very nature, are not contained within themselves. You need to know about something else in order to get anything out of the narrative of the novelization. Same thing with extended universe novels, right? Obviously, the gigantic example here would be Star Wars. The extended universe of Star Wars is rife with books that don't make any sense on their own. The dramatic beats only contain the drama that they have because of events in somebody else's book. Maybe it's written as long as 2 or 3 years ago. That the author is expecting you will know. They're expecting that you will catch the payoff moment. They're building their book around it. It's not like a little hidden Easter egg where the narrative works just fine, but if you're in on the know, you'll get a little something extra. The narrative is built on it. In a lot of Star Trek Extended Universe, or Star Wars Extended Universe novels that I read, Star Trek's another example, where if the writer is lazy, they will just assume that you know what they're talking about. They will assume that they don't need to explain who Charlie X is or anything like that. And so they won't. And that makes the book incomplete on its own terms. Is that an indication of garbage? Certainly that's a yardstick that I think we could use. Another question is the book pointlessly lurid? One thing if a certain amount of luridness is natural to the plot, right? If that rises out of something, if you're writing a book about a killer, for instance, there'll be a certain amount of lurid stuff in there that it'd be hard to avoid. It'd be hard to avoid it and still make it seem believable. But I'm talking about gratuitous and excess luridity. Gratuitous and excess, where bodies are mutilated and the process is lovingly described, where it doesn't have to be violence or mutilation. It could also be copulation. Is that luridly described? Are you meant to linger over it? Is it meant to sort of put you in the moment in a way that has nothing to do with the willing suspension of disbelief and the absorption of the reader into the narrative that normal, non-trash books routinely do? This kind of luridness has nothing to do with that. It's designed instead to make you sort of broil. It's designed to inflame what a previous generation referred to as animal passions, whether it be revulsion or lust or whatever. Is the book doing that? And is it doing a lot of that? That's another question that you might want to ask. I think it would be safe to say that only trash does that. Another question that we might ask is the book part of a series that has any more than 3 entries? And here, Again, I'm not saying that these things define trash. I'm not saying that if you answer to these questions as yes, the book in question is garbage. I'm not saying that. Like, for instance, what are examples? You go to science fiction, obviously, for books in series, and the later novels in the Tales of Alvin Maker by Orson Scott Card are definitely not garbage, but they do go on. I would argue that the series is at its peak in book 3, Princess Alvin, but the books do go on after that, and there's no way you can say that they aren't good. Same thing with the Emberverse series by S.M. Sterling. I've recommended Dies the Fire, the first book in that series, many, many times. It goes on for a long, long time. Ordinarily, according to my own question, anything after book 3 would be garbage. But book 5, Meeting at Corvallis, is one of the best books in the series. And I'm sure you know series like that yourself. It does happen. So, but it is a question, right? It is a question. And the question impinges on the first question. Because if you're writing book 20 in a series, what are the chances that your book is complete in and of itself? Virtually nil. There's virtually no chance of that. Instead, it could be that the higher up in number you go for question number 3, the closer you get to question number 1 about writing books that aren't complete in themselves at all. Look at the latest Janet Evanovich, any latest Janet Evanovich novel. They're virtually incomprehensible if you haven't read the rest of the series, because they are not complete on their own. Then we'll move on to the next question. Is the book something the author is ashamed of? Did the author write under a pseudonym? Or in interviews, does the author sort of not talk about it? That sort of thing. Like, for instance, there was a series of action-adventure He-Man novels that would definitely be considered trash. They starred a guy named Dusky. That wasn't his real name. He got that name because in the first book of the series, he flashes back to when he was a young man and killed a dusky shark with a penknife in the water, in the dark. He manages to do it in front of witnesses so that becomes his nickname, because that's just how tough he is. And those novels are all set in southern Florida, and those novels were all written by someone who was also a famous novelist in his own right. And he very much disowned them. He very much disowned those novels. I think once you know the shared paternity, you can see it in a heartbeat. Same thing with a bunch of other stories. A bunch of adventure novels, cheesy adventure novels, were written by writers who went to great lengths to hide their authorship, because they and their publisher feared it would hurt their renown, that it would hurt their brand. So that's one way to tell from this question. Is the author going out of the way to hide their authorship? If so, the book could very well be garbage. But I also want to point out, because it's unavoidable, that sometimes the obverse of this question is also worth asking. Is the author ostentatiously not hiding their participation? If they're going out of their way not to hide their authorship, that also could be a bad sign, right? Look at the novels of Jackie Collins or Jilly Cooper. They don't hide this stuff at all. They're brazenly proud of it. And in cases like that, that is a surefire indication that the book is garbage. So you win either way, or you lose either way. Then the next question is the book often prompting you to think, I could do better myself? And here I'm not talking about cover design or landing a manuscript, a complete manuscript on your agent's desk. Those things are, landing a complete manuscript on anybody's desk is a hard thing to do. Garbage or no garbage, that is a hard thing to do. I'm not saying that you're reading along and you're thinking, well, I could write a novel in the next year. Probably you're not thinking that. I'm saying that you're reading a scene. Some scene. The hero's just come back from an action set piece in the beginning of the novel. He's made its way to his home. He took a grazing shot from one gunshot. It's not bad enough to go to the hospital, and he can't go to the hospital anyway because he doesn't want to be known to the authorities in the city where he is. But he has a woman friend who's there in his apartment, and she cleans him up, fixes him up, and they talk. And you're reading that scene, and you're thinking, this is done by a little kid with crayons. I could write this scene better than this. I'm in this scene. I'm involved. I'm invested in the book. But I could do a better job of this than the author is doing. This specific thing. If you're reading a novel, I'll stick to novels here. If you're reading a novel, and you're having that feeling over and over again, chances are very good that you're reading garbage. Very good. If the book on the page is prompting you to think that, where if you read a short story of John Cheever or a novel of Eudora Welty, you would not think that. You would not have that thought, no matter what your other thoughts were. You wouldn't think, oh, you did that all wrong. I could do that better myself. Don't you even see the potentials in this scene? You wouldn't think that unless you were reading garbage, in which case you might find yourself thinking that quite often. So that's another yardstick, another question to ask yourself. Do you often find yourself reading through a book and thinking, I could write this better myself? But the final question, in a way, the ultimate question, to determine whether or not something may or not be garbage, is an age-old question. It's part of this garbage diagnostic kit, but it's an age-old question on BookTube and off BookTube. And in a way, it touches right at the heart of anything that celebrates garbage literature, that celebrates trash literature. In a way, it gets right to the heart of that, because when we mention those terms, we're talking about something, right? And we all think we know it when we see it. And that gets right to the heart of the ultimate garbage diagnostic question here, which is the book objectively bad? We've been down this road before. We have had this debate wonderfully in this little corner BookTube infinitely. You all know where I stand. It is absurd to say that it is impossible to objectively assess the merits and lack thereof of a written work of literature. That is absurd to say. Plenty of people do. Plenty of people say, especially if you disagree with them about something they like, eventually you will get out of them that hated line, well, it's all subjective. It's not. It's not all subjective. You know that as well as I do. If you know perfectly well that the note that your kid, the paragraph that your kid scribbled on a piece of paper imagining a magic purple dragon, is not anywhere near as good as Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. Now, you might say, well, if you're going to pick examples like that, ones that all the way at one end of the spectrum, the ones that all the way at the other end of the spectrum, if you're going to say that, I am going to claim victory, because in that disclaimer, you have already acknowledged the existence of a spectrum. And if you acknowledge the existence of a spectrum, you are acknowledging a difference in objective ability. Obviously, this is true. Writing prose is not the one and only thing humans do that has no objective measure. I think it's completely obvious that books can be objectively assessed. And if they can, if that question is going to be brought up and settled in this little diagnostic kit, then the ultimate question that you would ask about garbage fiction, if you're reading a book and you're wondering, is this bad? Are we the baddies? Would be, is it objectively bad? Pacing, dialogue, realization of characters, the description of locations, the sense of the plot, the sense of motivations, the consistency from scene to scene, from part to part, from beginning to end. Those things can be objectively measured. Not, again, as I always say when this subject comes up, it has nothing to do with whether or not you enjoy it. That has nothing to do with it at all. That can't be objectively quantified, and it shouldn't be. And anyone who tells you, if someone tells you, okay, X book that you're praising is bad, well, then you shouldn't feel offended, of course. Instead, you shouldn't feel defensive. You should just immediately say, well, let's talk about it. Why do you say that it's bad? Give me examples. Here are the examples that I have of why I think it's good. What are your examples of why it's bad? Ideally, in this little corner of BookTube, we're a little spoiled. It doesn't happen in the rest of the world. But ideally, those conversations should be incredibly fun. There shouldn't be any skin in the game, nothing defensive at all. It should just be, can you change my mind or can I change yours? This isn't brain surgery. This is books. And if you've got secure readers, which somehow or other we have managed to secure, we've managed to gather a few hundred secure readers in one little corner of the world. If you're a secure reader, then you're going to have that conversation with both feet. You're going to love it. You're not going to feel defensive at all. If that same person, instead of saying this book is bad, says you shouldn't like it, you're wrong to like it, then show them the door. That not only can't be quantified, but is something that only a roaring a-hole would even say. There are two different things, though, is my contention. My contention is that there are two different things. Books can be obsessed objectively. So the ultimate question about garbage, I would think that one of the ultimate operating definitions of garbage is that it's a book that fails. It's a book that's poorly done. Now, what I want to know from you is, do you think that's true? Would you be willing to say, at least, no matter what else we don't agree with about what is and isn't garbage, would you at least be willing to say that something has to fail as a book objectively in order to qualify as garbage? Or do you know books that fail objectively and are not garbage? Anyway, that's a list of a few questions that we can ask. Is the book complete in its own terms? Is it pointlessly lurid? Is it part of an endless series? Number 17 out of 250. Is the book something the author's ashamed of, or maybe a little not ashamed of? And is the book often prompting you to think, I could do better than this myself? And finally, is the book objectively bad? Does it drop the ball? Does it have holes in the plot, threadbare characters, dumb descriptions? These are some questions that we can ask, but ultimately it's a debate, it's a discussion, and it's the type of discussion that I love. Why, it would be wonderful if there was some sort of booktube event arranged around garbage. Now, wouldn't there be? You've already heard rumors, haven't you? It's entirely possible that such an event is trundling your way with a stellar cast of hosts. Maybe they will get to the bottom of what is and what is not garbage. Maybe we will have an E equals MC squared equation by the time we're done. Or we'll have a whole bunch of hosts at each other's throats. It could be either way. But I wanted to pose these questions just to get the conversation started with you. Do any of these questions make sense to you? When the answer to any of these questions is yes, for you with the book that you're reading, do you then classify it as trash? Or is classifying trash in something that you read something that you don't even need to ask questions about? The age-old quip about pornography, I know it when I see it. Is that the yardstick that you just go by? I'd love to know. Either way, but that's a little response video to Michael. I'll leave a link to Michael's video down below. A little response video to the question of what is garbage. Let's ponder together. Thank you, BookTube.